Hello everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Realpolitik. This is Stanley Johnny, the Hindu's International Affairs editor. In many ways, it was a crucial election for Sri Lanka. It was the first election since President Gotabaya Rajapaksa was booted out of power by a popular uprising in July 2022. It was an election that was largely fought on economic issues. It was an election where the Rajapaksas, the family that dominated Sri Lanka's politics for years, were not a significant factor. Namal Rajapaksa, son of former President and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, was one of the 38 candidates but was never seen as a frontrunner. The fight was largely between three candidates. Incumbent Ranil Wickremesinghe, who assumed presidency after Gotabaya fled the country in 2022, opposition leader Sajith Premadasa, and Anura Kumara Dissanayake, leader of the Janatha Vimukthi Peramuna, a party with Marxist origins. While Wickremesinghe and Premadasa represented the old establishment, Dissanayake, a leftist who had earlier said what Sri Lanka wanted was a liberation struggle, not just a regime change, pitched himself as an agent of change, the original promise of Janatha Aragalaya, or People's Struggle, the mass movement that brought down the Rajapaksas. He promised to fix the island nation's battered economy and wipe out racism. His outsider image and promise to break from the past seemed to have helped him win the trust of Sri Lanka's voters and script history. On September 23rd, 2 days after his election victory, Dissanayake was sworn in as the new president of Sri Lanka. To discuss Dissanayake's victory and the challenges he faces both on the domestic and foreign policy front, I'm joined by Meera Srinivasan, the Hindu's correspondent in Sri Lanka. Hello Meera, welcome to Realpolitik. Meera, to begin with, are you surprised by the election results?
Not entirely, Stanley, because as we saw through our reporting that there was a very definite call for change among Sri Lankan citizens. But what we couldn't be entirely sure about was what degree of change they wanted, because both oppositional candidates were promising change and a shift from the old corrupt ways, they would say. So it was to be seen how exactly the electorate would choose. And from our anecdotal sort of input gathering on the ground, it seemed like Anura Kumara Dissanayake had definite support, and Sajith Premadasa too had some support. So it was hard to call the election, but we knew that the incumbent had the least of chances. So in that, it was not entirely surprising.
Yeah, but in your opinion, what propelled him to victory? At the end of the day, Dissanayake is an outsider. He's not from a prominent political family. He's not from a leading political party. Okay, JVP has been around for quite some time, but the dominant political factions were other parties. So what actually propelled him to victory to become the president of Sri Lanka?
I think precisely what you said, that he's not from the old political order, political elite, and for the elections of Sri Lankans, I think they were looking for somebody outside of the system that they were so frustrated with, and this really takes off from the Aragalaya, or the People's Struggle of 2022, where in addition to saying "Gota go home," which is the popular chant of that time to demand that then President Gotabaya Rajapaksa resign, they also sought system change. There was a very emphatic call for system change, and by that they meant, we are tired of the old order, the old political establishment. They accused it of being corrupt and inefficient, and really being the reason for the economic mismanagement and the downfall of the country's economy. So in that, I think there was a bit of a vacuum once the people's movement ended, sometime after Mr. Rajapaksa resigned. So in that vacuum, JVP was able to, project itself as that change, as that alternative, as that other. And, meanwhile, let's not forget that the JVP and the NPP, the broader alliance that they started in 2019, had been working very steadily on the ground from 2019 and 2020 when they had a poll debacle. They did very, very poorly in those presidential and parliamentary elections. And they started the groundwork soon after. So that very steady grassroots mobilization and campaign, coupled with the vacuum and the opportunity that the post Aragalaya phase provided, I think helped AKD, as he is known, as Anura Kumara Dissanayake is known, catapult into more prominence and eventually to presidency.
So we can say that there was a quest for change after the people's uprising. And then Mr. Dissanayake, being an outsider, that image helped him present himself as a champion of change and capture the public mood and anger, isn't it?
That's right. Yes, that's right.
So, yeah, could you give us a little bit background about his party? Because if you look at JVP, it had a controversial past. It had a couple of armed insurrections against the state, and there were I saw reports accusing the party of being racist in the past. Whereas Dissanayake presented himself as someone, in one of your interviews with him, which was published, I think, a few months earlier, he says that what Sri Lanka wanted was a liberation struggle, not just regime change. So, if you look at JVP as a political machinery, how do you look at the party?
So the JVP was really founded in the 60s, and the party is rooted in Marxist Leninist ideology, or at least that was the origin of the party. And they drew a lot of inspiration from Che Guevara, and they were trying to present themselves as a revolutionary movement in Sri Lanka. And the first armed insurrection that the JVP led, the uprising, was in 1971, which drew a lot from those ideals. And they wanted to basically overthrow the state, they wanted to topple capitalism, they wanted economic and social justice. So that is where the party really has its roots. But of course, it would take a very, very decisive turn in the 80s and become Sinhala nationalist and chauvinist. And especially in the late 80s, in 88, 89, they have the second armed insurrection, primarily against Tamil assertion for self-determination, and also the Indo-Lanka Accord of 1987, which really sought to address the ethnic question of Sri Lanka. So JVP mounted fierce opposition to both Tamil rights and India's role in trying to negotiate that. So, and that was a very bloody armed insurrection where, JVP cadre are accused of killing several, ordinary state employees, activists, left dissidents. And of course, it is also well known and documented that the state at that time, or the government led by President Ranil Wickremesinghe Premadasa, also unleashed, very, very violent so-called counter-terror measures, and tens of thousands of people were killed and disappeared at that time. So the JVP has seen, these two armed insurrections, and following that, they also have two very crucial political breakaways or splits. One is that it's very hardline Sinhala chauvinist faction decides to break away and directly align with Mahinda Rajapaksa, who's becoming a very prominent leader of that time, and that's the time he resolved to end the war and wage a battle against the LTTE. And there's also another split, meanwhile, of its more, let's say, more left segment, which is now today the Frontline Socialist Party. So the JVP has these two decisive splits, and what's left is what then enters the parliament, or rather, I mean, they entered the parliament earlier, but what's left of today's JVP is really the residual part of the party. And Anura Kumara Dissanayake was, appointed leader of the party in 2014. So it's been 10 years since he has been leading the party. And they've really sought to recast themselves as a parliamentary party, although in the fringe, they've sought to project that image rather than this radical revolutionary image. And Anura Kumara Dissanayake in particular, over the last 10 years, and especially in the last 7-8 years, we've seen his interventions in parliament, which are pro democracy and in many cases conciliatory towards the minorities. And that's the reason that in 2018, when there is a political crisis, when then President Maithripala Sirisena abruptly, sacks then Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, JVP emerges a very important voice in the southern polity that is challenging this move and saying this is anti-democratic, anti-constitutional. They even go to the Supreme Court with several other petitioners. And so I would say that in the last 10 years, they have worked towards recasting themselves as a party with a commitment to democracy, and they have tried to project that image. And it is really in the last 5 years that you see them gain prominence, although even before the 2019 elections there is a lot of buzz because of how they intervened during 2018 during the crisis. So there is a lot of hype and buzz around the NPP, which was just set up that time to host the JVP as a political party, but with several other parties, artists, professionals, and so on, academics, as a social coalition. So there is definitely some excitement around NPP in 2019, but that really doesn't translate to any electoral gain for Anura Kumara Dissanayake, who contested the 2019 elections. He got just over 3% of the total votes, and in the subsequent parliamentary elections, 3 out of 225 seats. So although the electoral performance really was not very encouraging for the party, I think they re-centered and recommitted to building something since then. And I think that the economic crisis that came with the pandemic and later, policy blunders and then the mass uprising, all this eventually created the space, and JVP was able to take that.
So I was just looking at the statement by the new president after he was sworn in yesterday on 23rd of September. So basically he was saying, Mr. Dissanayake was saying that he is committed to rebuilding the country, but at the same time, he is not a magician. I'm not a miracle worker. So that's what he's saying. Is he playing down the public hope after he was elected?
Right. I think they would definitely acknowledge the great expectation their campaign has created, the very, very high expectation that, their pledges have created among people. At the same time, this is, I think, a very realistic admission of what is possible in the immediate future, because Sri Lanka is, still very much in the middle of a crisis, though you see a measure of stability in terms of shortages being addressed, and the country being able to recover, or at least begin recovering. The people of Sri Lanka will tell you that their crisis is far from over, and I think any leadership should acknowledge that. And even at the macroeconomic level, they have several challenges like debt restructuring with very diverse set of creditors, and then how to deal with the austerity measures that were implemented as part of the IMF program. Now, Anura Kumara Dissanayake has said he will adhere to the IMF program, but renegotiate parts of it and also address the pain that it has inflicted upon ordinary Sri Lankans through austerity measures like, say, very high indirect taxes, very high utility bills, cost of living is still very high. So I think it's a very realistic admission that, things are not going to change dramatically tomorrow, but publicly committing to journey towards that objective. So I think, yes, in some measure, it could have been a way of underplaying what this government can do, but at the same time, also being transparent about the limitations there are immediately.
Does he have an alternative economic plan from what Ranil had implemented for Sri Lanka? You've been following his election campaign.
Right.
So has he laid out any alternative economic plan for Sri Lanka?
Sure. So one thing that all three key candidates this election, whether it was Ranil Wickremesinghe, Sajith Premadasa, or now President Dissanayake, put forward, they all said they will go as per the IMF program and the broad design of the IMF program. So that is expected to continue. At the same time, I think part of their policy pledge was that in the manifesto was that the threshold for taxes will be increased so that more people are able to be below the taxable income limit. And then they have really outlined several policies which are medium term and long term, including building industry, building a more resilient economy that is less reliant on imports and so on. But these policy prescriptions are really going to take a long while before they see actual implementation, because I think the immediate focus of this government will be to consolidate power in parliament. As I told you, they have only 3 out of 225 seats, and the parliamentary elections are expected very soon, maybe in November or December. And in fact, we are expecting announcements either today or tomorrow about the dissolution of the current parliament. So I think their immediate focus will be to consolidate power in parliament, and it is only after that they may get to actual specific economic policy interventions that can alter what's currently being seen in Sri Lanka.
Meera, what does the election mean for the country's Tamil minority? Because the Tamil question remains unresolved. The demand for a political settlement has been there, but you don't see any constructive approach from the political establishment. Now that you have an outsider, within quotes, being the president of Sri Lanka, who, in an interview with you a few weeks ahead of the election, said that wiping out racism is one of his priorities. How do you think this election is going to impact on the Tamil minorities of Sri Lanka?
Right. So AKD did not do particularly well in the Tamil majority areas of the north and also some districts in the east. So if you see the voter vote share breakup, it was Sajith Premadasa who got the highest share of Tamil votes, close to 42%, followed by Ranil Wickremesinghe, the outgoing president. And then it was Anura Kumara Dissanayake, followed by a Tamil common candidate. So this tells us something about how Tamils may need time to warm up to his leadership to start with, for 2 reasons. One is that he's not a very familiar political entity for the Tamils, for at least some of them. And for others, I think they have very, very strong memories of the JVP of the 80s, which vehemently opposed Tamil rights, political rights. So I think caught between these two positions, I think it was hard for many, many more voters to endorse his campaign. But close to 15% in these districts have voted for him. So, in terms of expectations, going by the manifesto, I think it's significant that AKD has promised to take forward a constitutional drafting process that began in 2015 when President Sirisena and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe were in government, and they started this process involving the chief Tamil party at the time, the alliance, the Tamil National Alliance, which said the constitution that was being drafted was imagined outside of the 13th Amendment, or rather beyond the 13th Amendment that is currently available as a measure of power sharing with the provincial councils, with the provinces in Sri Lanka. So they have promised that new constitution. They have also promised to abolish the Prevention of Terrorism Act, which Tamils have for long wanted, to be abolished, because it's considered a draconian law, which was used against Tamils, and so many Tamil dissidents and those suspected of links to the LTT were targeted using the PTA and imprisoned for several years together. In fact, some are still demanding release. So they've also promised and acknowledged these, those who are still in custody as political prisoners, the language that the Tamil leadership uses. So that is another significant, aspect of their manifesto. But I think there is generally some skepticism and some suspicion, one to do with the party's past, and also this disillusionment. They've seen several leaders promise different things in so many years, and especially in the 15 years after the Civil War. And today in the North and East, it is still militarized. 15 years after the Civil War ended, that region alone is disproportionately militarized compared to the rest of the country. And then you see several acts of ongoing land grabs by state agencies in the name of archaeology, forest conservation, and so on. And these are pieces of land that Tamils have been accessing in the past, but no more have access to. So there are these, enduring, ways in which they feel that there is active discrimination, and they would really like that to end. Of course, AKD has promised to do that, but I'd like to also touch upon a brief controversy that came up during the campaign. So, as Anura Kumara Dissanayake was rallying all over the country, and in fact, in the South, he would say it's not enough if we form government with just Sinhalese votes. We need to form government with Tamils, Muslims, all ethnic minorities. But after the main Tamil party, the Ilangai Tamizhar Katchi, decided to back Sajith Premadasa, there was one rally in Jaffna where AKD made a speech which was construed as being a soft threat, or some even criticized him for being racist, because he said something to the effect of, the people of the South in Sri Lanka seem ready for change and they are really backing our campaign. Do you want to not be part of that? Do you want to be outside of that? So he was putting this as a critique of the Ilangai Tamizhar Katchi's decision to back Sajith Premadasa, his rival. But the social media chatter and debates at that time really found that statement problematic. But very interestingly, a prominent Tamil legislator from Jaffna, M.A. Sumandiran, who in fact pledged support to Sajith Premadasa, made a public statement to say Anura Kumara Dissanayake is not racist. I know him for a very long time. He would not have meant this in a racist sense. While he's right in calling us to join his journey against corruption and to change the political culture, we are certainly ready to be part of that journey regardless of the outcome of this election. At the same time, I would call upon him to join our journey, the journey of Tamils for the last 70 years, demanding equality, justice, and rights. So that statement was seen by many as something very conciliatory, and subsequently, AKD thanked Sumandiran in several public meetings. So I think there is a conversation, and there is that space where the Tamil leadership, or at least part of it, is willing to talk to him and see him as somebody they can engage with. So even after the election outcome, some Tamil leaders have said we're really hoping that he will be sincere in his pledge to Tamils, and that we want to engage and take this forward.
Interesting. Apparently, after his swearing in, he said yesterday that he will work hard to win the trust and confidence of all Sri Lankans. I think we will wait and see how he is going to live up to his words. And Meera, let's.
Stanley, sorry, if I may add, when he said that, he said he would work hard to win the trust of all those who voted for him, but he would work very hard, especially to earn the trust of those who didn't vote for him. So that also was seen as a positive message by many.
Correct. Now let's turn to foreign policy, Meera. So Sri Lanka has been doing a lot of balancing act between bigger powers, especially India and China. And Sri Lanka, if you look at it from a strategic point of view, is situated at a very important geographical location in the Indian Ocean region. So, do you foresee any major shift in the foreign policy of Dissanayake administration?
No, I don't. Actually, not at all, because I think his explicit message in different platforms, in interviews to us, in his manifesto, has been that they will work with all international partners. In fact, he said that even in his inaugural speech yesterday. He said Sri Lanka needs international support. Sri Lanka does not have geopolitical concerns. Other big powers could have concerns among themselves, but Sri Lanka will strive to work with all its partners in the best interest of Sri Lankans. So that has been his very consistent message. And as you know, he was invited to Delhi earlier this year and had meetings with the foreign minister, the EAM, and the national security advisor, and the South Bloc senior officials. And he also traveled to different parts and had meetings. I think there is both an acknowledgement from New Delhi that this here's a leader who has popular support, and they were preparing for a possible victory, is how many saw it. And even after the presidential election outcome was clear, it was the Indian High Commissioner in Colombo who was among the first, in fact, perhaps the first to go and wish AKD in person. And soon after that, he met Dr. Harini Amarasurya, who has today been named Prime Minister. So you see these very quick and very clear diplomatic outreach from the Indian mission here, but also to say that the Chinese ambassador has also since met the new president to convey his wishes, and President Xi also, we saw in the Chinese media, has put out a message congratulating AKD and saying he would like to deepen BRI partnership. So I think both the countries also acknowledge that they need to work with Sri Lanka, and of course, the Sri Lankan president too has said he's going to work with everybody.
One last thing, Meera, correct me if I am wrong. JVP was very critical of India or Indian foreign policy in the past, right?
Definitely, yes, they were.
So you don't see that ideological position of the JVP impacting the foreign policy of the new administration in any way?
No, I think from that very strong ideological position, the JVP itself, as it got closer and closer, as it got entrenched in parliamentary politics and it got closer to the possibility of actually capturing power, I think it has shifted from that ideological position to a pragmatic position where they have to construct policy in a way that they can work with different actors. So I think they've now indicated that they will choose what is realistic and pragmatic for them as a party in power, as an alliance in power. And that they seem to indicate includes their desire to work with all partners, including India, who they may have in the past detested. So Sri Lanka has broken with the old establishment and elected a political outsider as the new president. But change is easier promised than delivered. As Meera says, Sri Lanka is still very much in crisis. And Mr. Dissanayake, who promised change and promised to uplift the lives of millions of Sri Lankans, is to live up to the promises he made during the election campaign. And he has to continue to do a tough balancing on the foreign policy front. It is to be seen how Mr. Dissanayake is going to deliver on the promises he made. Thank you very much. For more such videos, please subscribe to The Hindu.